So kia ora koutou. My name is Monique Kelly. I am fifth generation on this motu down in South Island. Come from a farming background, and my ancestors came over here from Ireland after the famine because they no longer had homes and could no longer feed their families. So they took off on the ships in the 40s, 50s, 60s, went via sometimes San Francisco, sometimes Ballarat, to find their way and onto this land. And we have been farming here for a long time. Two of my great-grandfathers were the first to bring in, great-great-grandfathers, first to bring cows into Edendale. And they set up the dairy cooperative. So there was the Wyndham Dairy Cooperative and the Edendale Dairy Cooperative, which have now become Fonterra. I am a lawyer by trade, but I think I classify myself, you go into law for different reasons. My reason for going into law was social justice and fairness, and I would classify myself as a humanist, someone who is very, has a strong sense of what is fair for communities, and that is where I put my voice and my advocacy into creating fair, just spaces where we can live. And so the first part of my career, I went over to Geneva and I worked with the International Labour Organization for around about 20 years, actually. And I was in a team called PolNorm, and PolNorm was set up to take an integrated approach to standard setting, which sounds really policy geeky, nerdy, yuck. But what it did as a young 24-year-old going into that big system was actually giving me a systems perspective of how we create law over time and how we bring it right from grassroots, flax roots level up to implementing it and having a global vision for where we want to go. And my first ever exercise as this young 24-year-old with a very cheap shoes, rocking up to this big space where I felt kind of intimidated, was looking through 100 years of occupational safety and health law and discovering how it came to be that we started to have a social level playing ground, fair playing ground for people and decent work. And under that banner for 2 years, I went and analyzed what are the triggers, what are the levers, what were the drivers for going into this cowboy state where nothing was regulated, children could be playing and actually working with toxic chemicals. There was no working hour limits. There was a massive human cost to what that industrial revolution brought about, which actually drove us post-World War I to say, what is our social minimum that we want to have? And we want to do it as a globe. So post-Treaty of Versailles, the ILO was set up. It was the first UN entity along with the League of Nations. It's the only one that's existed and continues to exist, so predates the UN. And it's a really unique organization in that if you imagine in Parliament, we have a war that's effectively been taken into a parliamentary building. And we have a very adversarial system which is based on, instead of slinging cannons and muskets, we're slinging words. So in this system, what they set up post-World War I is a tripartite system. And you have employers, governments, and workers in equal measure. And those three entities have to decide about how to create the most just laws when it comes to how we work together and have that economic foundation. Seeing a different system and how it can be set up with just a simple, different idea, I get a real buzz out of it. I'm like, this is like systems at its best, where you're seeing it in practice and seeing how you can set the goal of a system and then you build the structure around it and you get some really, really good results. In the 100 and plus years now of that organisation, there's only ever 2 topics that governing body was not able to adopt. We have 197 member states, employers, workers, governments. You can imagine the diversity of thinking and the diversity of cultures and political stances in their 2 subjects. So coming back, and this is maybe with that formation and following occupational safety and health, I worked on other topics such as migrant workers, child labour, forced labour, looking at getting the Maritime Labour Convention set up as well, which is putting a minimum regulations for those seafarers that were on the sea. Up until 2008, nothing regulated their employment, nothing. It could have been slavery, no one could have said a thing, and it was. So coming back now to 2014, came back to here, came back to this whenua, where my parents lived. And it was actually one event that triggered me to start looking out of my decent work bubble. Does anyone, sustainable development goals? Everyone knows them. So I was the burgundy one, decent work. And I have my sort of like focus, this monofocus on just that goal. And there were a number of things in 2018 that really got me thinking about what the hell I was doing. And one of them was seeing Catherine Lining, who was on the Climate Commission, at a talk, and she came, and decent work had been our goal since 2000. In 2015, when they did the Sustainable Development Goals, it became part of this wider set. And she said something that has stuck in my mind when they were doing those goals up, is that every single one of those goals is interlinked. You cannot just see one thing for what it is. Everything is interlinked. And second is leave no one behind. And it made me start thinking about our community and looking at the waves of change that are coming. And we've got multiple. We've got the environmental issues that I think that we all know about, whether it's climate, biodiversity loss, the way we treat our water, our whenua, whether it's a kind of acceleration into the AI sphere and digital and social media and what that is bringing to our communities. Whether it's around what is decent work, what are we working for, what is our economy going to be like into the future. And it really, really, really worried me. And I think that most of you are probably here because it really worries you as well. And we set up, and we got together with a few people, Dr. Carly Green, who's a climate scientist, myself, Anna Craig, and a few others at that time, and said we need to actually use our skill set to help our community to be able to navigate change. But we need to do it in a way that we can set templates and systems up that other communities can take away with them and use if they want to. So we went on this journey about how to shift a system, and we set up WAO Aotearoa 2018. And at that time, if we think back, that was the time of climate protests and this really burgeoning hopefulness and awareness about what our impact on the community was. And if I look at the soil at that time, it was just perfect for planting that seed of change. And we had a lot of mindsets that were shifted, including mine. And so WAO Aotearoa was established with a really holistic lens because we felt it was really important that we don't just single out climate action, we don't just single out water, land, we don't just single out looking at poverty or hunger. We actually look at it and we see where are the flows between them, where are the links, where are the leverage points, how can we actually play with the system in this small petri dish that is surrounded by mountains in order to experiment and innovate and find ways that we can create a new blueprint for the future. And so what we've done in the past years has set up a way of taking systems theory and making it pragmatic. how do we actually take what Melissa was talking about in terms of leverage points, and who are the systems geeks in this? Anybody else really like systems? Danella Meadows, yeah, okay. So if we look at Danella Meadows' work and we look at how we shift a community, because our job at WAO, what we do is looking at these waves of change, thinking, are we going to get pummeled, or is that cranky boat needing to be renovated? And actually, how about we redesign the whole thing and we create a surfboard? And then let's look at how we navigate on the surfboard and we surf change rather than get pummeled by it. So our job is to help communities to understand change and navigate the waves that are coming. And we do this in a really simple way, and it's a way I think that is connected very much into foodscape and those who know nature language. We take an ecosystems approach. So not just a systems approach, but an ecosystems approach. In our strategic whare, we have a few key focus areas. One is resilient communities, better business, climate and biodiversity or nature-based action, and partnership and collaboration. And that runs through everything we do. And underneath that, we go, and the first thing that we do is take that first principle of permaculture before we start anything, is observe. So we just look and see. So in our community, what we did in 2018 is we mapped out every single one of the SDG, and we looked at who are the organizations, who are the social organizations, who are the business organizations, who are the environmental organizations, and who are the institutions and government organizations working in this area. And we create this map, if you can imagine, kind of like this constellation or mycelium, or like a mycelium with your nutrient bombs all throughout it. And then we link them up. And where there are no links, we put a ... so we can see what does our ecosystem look like. And then what we do is we interact. So we start to do research, surveys, find out, is there a problem? We think it could be here, but no, it's not, so let's go here. So one of the first things, areas that we went into was hospitality industry. And there was a little group called Wanaka Hospo Goes Eco that was set up. And we were, okay, we think that organic waste might be a really big problem, and we think that plastics could be a big problem. So let's go out and actually see what is the problem. What we found by that observe and interact is that organic waste wasn't the problem. Most of our cafes were actually putting it to the pigs. Someone was coming and picking it up. It was actually being looked after. But where it was a huge problem is single use. So suck-free, single-use cup-free Wanaka was born out of those conversations. We then had another look at our ecosystem and said, well, where are the big economic drivers? Like, where are we actually playing and working? And another one was the better building, or the building sector. And so we looked at that sector. We had a few people come together, mapped out the ecosystem. And the idea with that is so what we do, and our role is we activate clusters to drive systems shift. And why we activate clusters is because it's the most efficient way to get change at scale. And you're working with a coalition of the willing, so you have to get that in your ecosystem, know that the soil is right for that group to be formed and that cluster to start discussing. We get everybody into a room. We help them to set their priorities, their agenda, and then we choose 3 priorities, and then we have a number of initiatives. And those initiatives we put through an impact canvas to decide what are the good initiatives that need to be had. And under that impact canvas, we're looking at things like, well, how far deep are we going in terms of system shift? You know, the iceberg model, if you're familiar with it. Danella Meadows did a really good iceberg model. And I think Melissa, who listened to Melissa on Friday? Most of you. So when we're looking at systems shift, as she would have said, you know, you can go really deep down, and if you go really deep down, you shift mindsets. So for me, 2018 was a pivotal point where my mindset shifted and my whole world shifted towards that. So you get that mindset shift, you change the goal. So if I talk about the Better Building Group, we got this collective together and they said, this is not good enough. We're looking at what we're building and we actually need to shift and change. And there was a bunch of builders, a developer at the time, real estate agent, suppliers, who were all sitting around the table saying, we need to do something. So that you could see the mindset had shifted. And that was coming off the first WAO Summit, where we had a whole lot of different talks about what the future could look like. We had to set a new goal. So there was, does anyone know Dunlop Builders here? Incredible building company. Donnell and Bryce have had that for a while, and Bryce and they have both been huge advocates around how to reduce waste, how to increase energy efficiency in building. And we were at a C&D, so a construction demolition workshop during the second summit. So mindset shifted in the first summit, second summit was the goal. And he said, you know, guys, this is how we need to build. This is how we build in Wanaka, and we need to set that bar. So we now have a campaign of this is the bar that we want to reach. It has nothing to do with regulation. And following that, what we found is that really hard bit of systems shift, because often we go straight to, well, we're just going to shift our behavior now. But it doesn't work like that in real life. When you change mindset and you change the goal, you still have to deal with all of the scaffolding, the laws, the regulations, the systems, all of the stuff, the social infrastructure, the actual infrastructure, before you can actually have behavior change. And that's the really, really, really hard bit. And so that for the past 5 years is what our group have been working towards with the Better Building Working Group, is untangling that scaffolding that you put around a system to actually redesign a new way of how do we build communities. It's not just about building buildings. How do we build communities? How do we integrate into those communities energy flows, food systems, active transport flows? How are we building out toxicity? Because what happens at the end of life for that building, for that community? Are we doing it in the right place? What happens when there's no more fossil fuel? Is it so far out of town it's going to become a ghetto in 100 years? And so now, today, what we have with that group, and we have 26 active members, placemakers, Mitre 10, about 5 different building companies from big to small, including Naylor Love, Cook Brother, GJ Gardner. You've got different developers in there, engineers, architects, who are all going, we need to rethink completely how we do this. We need to get a blueprint for where we're going. And so we have a new project which is called the Journey to 2125. And that is going to be the interface for that sector to know from an idea in 2025, knowing that that building is going to be there when someone is born today as a grandpa or a grandma in the future. How is that building still going to be fit for purpose? Is that development still going to be fit for purpose? And so the idea with this is to have a really pragmatic, very education-based interface where you can see how to integrate natural building materials into your building, how to build so that you're building out and designing out waste rather than embedding it in what you're doing. How can you do it so that you're able to dismantle those buildings at the end of their life and put them back into the ground or recreate them into something else? And so that model of what we do, and if we look at the different way that we will look at an initiative and how it goes forward, we're putting onto, like at the ILO, we put it onto any subject. So last year, after 2 years of research into the area, with the help of Danielle, we established the Southern Lakes Kai Collective. And so that group currently, we've had a look at the ecosystem. We know exactly how that looks within this district, who are the players, who needs to be around the table. We bring them together into the Kai Collective. We then put forward or give the capacity to say, well, where are our priorities at the moment? Where are we actually needing to do that blueprint for? And we have 7 initiatives that have come out of that we've gone through and done a feasibility study with. And Danielle, you can correct me if I'm wrong. The first one is actually establishing a Kai collective. So the Southern Links Kai collective is an inclusive group where anyone can come in and actually provide their expertise. So if we think that it's this collective knowledge from all parts of the system, including the health system. So we're going wider than just growers, distributors. We're pulling in our community growers. We're pulling in council, climate leaders. We're pulling in environmental groups. And we're looking at food as a big one. Because I think for us, from me anyway, if I look at the biggest challenge we've got is how do we create a safe habitat for species, including ourselves, to thrive in the future? And that means shelter and food. So that's a big focus for us. So this group is in itself a mindset shift because we're discussing it and we're providing a forum where people can come together and come up with initiatives. The other initiatives further up the systems map, looking at we need a processing hub. And if we look at demographics pushing out in 2040, mid-2040s, we should surpass Dunedin in population size just in this district if we go off the last 30 years growth percentage. It's a huge shift in population, massive. So we're talking 150,000 people. If we combine that with Central Otago, we're going to surpass that in 15 years. What does that mean for our structure, for our infrastructure, for our food, how we're actually creating food? So the first phase was looking backwards as well, and we looked at 100 years ago, 95% of our food came from the district. Currently, it's the reverse. 95% gets shipped in on trucks. And a lot of our food actually goes out as well. We've got the most amazing source of food here in terms of protein on the hills, which we've eaten, I think, thanks to the station for lunch, for dinners. How are we actually able to capture that and use it for community, and in particular this growing demographic? Those figures are not even taking into account climate migration. So that's just steady as you go, not taking into account pressure on our coastlines or overseas immigration. Now I think it's about looking forward. So what is our processing capabilities in terms of how we process food? That's what we call and we classify. When we put this through the impact canvas, we were asking ourselves questions like, if we looked at this as bringing this new thing into our forest, our ecosystem, is there a gap in the canvas for this, in the canopy for this? Are we duplicating? Is it just something that duplication is not necessarily bad if it's done in a small scale and you duplicate it throughout over a wider geographic expanse, but it's not good if you're eating each other's funding, for example. Or is it diversification? Is it bringing something completely new into it? Processing is a real gap in our canopy. We have a real need for that. But it is what we call, and this is another part of that impact canvas, is it a radish or a totara? Like when you're thinking about a project, is it something that is going to bring long-term systems shift? So you might not see the benefits immediately, but you'll see them over time. Or is it a quick radish? You need some that is going to feed the community really quickly. An idea of a radish would be one of the first ideas was the Wanaka Community Workshop. That was a quick idea, a radish that came out of the Better Building Working Group, and within 5 years it's up and running, and it's now an integral part of our community and really feeding into the ecosystem. So this one here is definitely a totara, because then you look at the risk, like when you're going into a garden, is this the right time and season to actually plant this seed? Is our soil actually okay